audio, the girls start recording, you could hear the gun cock because he cocks it and says down the hill. And then when he wanted them to stop, once they walk for a while, he cocks it again to kind of say, hey, now stop or I'm going to shoot. I think that when he did it that second time, I think it popped out, ejected. I'm just speculating.
That could be. Right. I mean, he might be carrying the gun. He doesn't have one in the chamber. And then, he racks it and then that, loads one into the chamber. He does it again and that one would eject potentially without being fired. Again, that's just complete speculation on my part.
Same.
But it's not outlandish. I mean, it's not like a crazy theory that could have happened, but
right. Yeah. I mean,
we just don't know.
We hear part one of it when he tells them to go down the hill. So he's directing them and kind of using that as a scare tactic. About the crime scene and the 2019 press conference. So when I heard the press conference, I'm like, oh, this is talking to BTK because he says like hiding in plain sight. I don't know a lot of profiles, but that's kind of what I thought of. Then you brought up something off air that was interesting about how he said if you had like a little bit conscience in you.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because what I was telling you is that sometimes in some cases, we would never advise, like particularly like an interview strategy, we would advise them, don't try to play on the person's emotions or sympathy for a victim because that's not what's going to matter to them. What's going to matter to them is how it can benefit them to talk to you. This would be like for an interview strategy. So and it would be case dependent. What happened? What did the offender do in the particular case? And back to the Weleetka case, it was such a cold-blooded killing that was an interview strategy. Don't play on his sympathy for the victims because he absolutely has none, and that's evidenced by the crime scene dynamics. It was what I believe just motivated. I think he exposed himself to the victims, and maybe one victim, and this is speculation on my part, maybe one victim it recognized him, or he just felt like, oh, they've seen me, so I'm going to have to kill them. And I know that seems like such a minor motive to kill two young girls, but it's impossible to understand what people are capable of sometimes. This what would motivate somebody, and I think it was just that simple, unfortunately.
Like if they rejected him and he got.
I don't think there was any I don't think it was anything necessarily like that. I mean, in his confession to investigators, he said he had pulled over to the side of the road to take a leak. And then he claimed he saw monsters. They were coming at him, so he had to shoot them. And then he got back in his car, and then they came at him again, so he had to go back and shoot them. And those were pretty much point blank in their heads. And so, just that action alone just told me he has absolutely no empathy for them, and all he's going to care about is himself. But in his confession, when he said he pulled over to take a leak, what is he really saying? He's saying he exposed himself. Obviously,
minimizing it.
Yeah, if he's claiming I pulled over that because I had to use, I had to relieve myself. Well, in order to relieve himself, he has to expose himself. So I believe that was really what it was. He was kind of being somewhat truthful in that he exposed himself, and I think that's what he did. And I think it was maybe an impulsive thing to do. And I'm not sure if one of the girls recognized who he was. It's a possibility she did based on investigation and investigation of relationships. And it is possible one of them could have known him. Or it's possible they just said, we're going to go tell on you. And he wasn't going to let that happen. Or he just thought, they're going to tell on me no matter what, so I've got to kill them now. And that's what I believe was the motive there. So you can see that case already is very different than this case. But it kind of gives you an idea, like just by approaching a case like that with some similarities, how you start kind of piecing things together and how you would do that in this particular case. But what I don't want to make the mistake of is saying that case is like this case, because it is not, but there's some similar circumstances, obviously. When you have two two girls in their teen years walking in a remote area and they inexplicably are killed. And everybody wondering who could do something like that. That's kind of, those are the similarities. And that's where they start to end when you start to really kind of look at each, individual aspect of the crimes. But you can learn. This is like, you can learn from that case how to take a look at this other case. And when I mean you, I just mean
in
generally
general.
people.
Yeah.
not you. So.
Okay, so let's talk about the Delphi murders again. If we can, let's look at the crime scene a little bit. Now, this is just a drawing of it. And I know you can only get so much from a drawing, but
one girl was nude, the other one was dressed. Have you seen anything like that where the victims are kind of, so there's one, he could have got interrupted during this before he kind of stages it how he wanted to, or this was his final act. This is exactly how he wanted it. We don't know. But is there anything there where one is dressed and one isn't, and with kind of branches being both over their, I would say, their main injuries?
Mm-hmm. First of all, I would just want to know, and maybe forensic evidence could provide answers to that. Did he force them, or at least force one victim to undress and have the other victim put on her clothing, or did he do this post-mortem? Those are things I would want to know. Perhaps lab tests and forensics results could give answers to that. If certainly testing the clothing for DNA and the logical areas he would have touched had that been done. So I would want to know that before I would offer any strong opinion as to why this was done. Is it for practical considerations? I highly doubt it, but possibly it could be a control thing. It could be you can't run if you don't have clothes, but I doubt that. But that is something, again, offered for consideration. Or was it something he forced them to do? And, this is part of his, his fantasy. If we wanted to, certainly there is a sexual component to this crime. One of the victims is nude. There's a sexual component. So is this partly a fantasy? So these are the types of things I would want to know. And that's where forensic evidence could help provide a little more detail. I'm inclined to believe he likely forced them to undress, but I have no inside information. The placement of the branches, I look at them, they seem very, and this is a drawing. So this is a drawing. I don't know how accurate it is. Look how careful I am.
I know.
Fig, I try to be so careful because somebody's going to come back. It is the scientist in me, but it's also, there's also a part of me that is very interested in talking this through and talking out loud about it. But I also want to make people know, I realize this is a drawing. I don't know how accurate it is. I don't, the branches seem very specifically placed, very carefully placed to me. Is it possible that they were just thrown on and they just landed? Possibly. This would just be something that I would spend a lot of time analyzing, looking at pictures, talking with people to really try to get this understanding of, and I may not ever get to that answer, but is it that he was just trying to conceal them and, like you said, was interrupted and didn't have enough time to completely cover them? Like you also pointed out, it's interesting that some of the branches are covering their injuries. Is this some, undoing, some regret, or some, I don't want to look at that, so I'm going to hide this? Is that going on? One of the things when we were talking about the press conference is, and when we were talking about remorse and empathy, and, the superintendent does speak to the offender and say, if you have any little bit of conscience, or we believe you have an ounce of conscience, or something along those lines. I can't recall his exact words, but I thought that was an interesting statement. So that made me think, what is it that they think that this offender may have some empathy or may have a conscience? Is there something in this particular crime scene that suggests that to them, that somehow he might feel bad? Or is that just, anybody must feel bad because they do something like this. And that's just not the case. So I did wonder if there was something, and is there something about the placement of this that indicated to them that he might be trying to cover up, not just for practical reasons, but for emotional reasons.
Since this is just a millisecond in time, this one snapshot of a picture, could it be possible that the scene looked different, where there was more branches or leaves and things, and then peel it back, take a picture, peel it back, take another picture? I'm assuming there's hundreds of photos, not 1,000, taken that day.
Yes. And you make a very good point, which we need to understand that if there were multiple layers, this would be something of an, even though it's a surface, what we would call a surface burial. Not these pictures. This is not a surface burial to me, but a surface burial being that somebody has been placed on the ground and then covered with surface materials such as leaves, branches, sticks, grass, or whatever. That's what I would call a surface burial. Now, was this a surface burial of some sort, and they're slowly excavating? And that's what we would do on, I was part of the evidence response team for the FBI. And, that's what we would do if we were, digging up, a body that had been buried. We'd do layer by layer. And we would do that in this case, layer by layer, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to miss any evidence that might be contained within those layers. So you're carefully excavating. So we really don't even know, if these drawings are made from pictures, we don't know at what point those pictures were taken in the process. We don't know, because you would be taking multiple pictures. And that is one thing about, documenting the crime scene. You take as many pictures as you can, just continue, particularly as you start kind of moving things and uncovering things, you want to show things in their original positions as best you can. So yeah, we don't know at any point what the process was here. This could be the way they were found, or it could be that they were covered even more.
Because it is documented. I'm not speculating or taking sides here, but there's documents where the defense admitted that they were negligent in a certain area, where there's a former employee took certain pictures, and people could speculate on if the defense knew about this and it was a strategy to put certain things out. But I think there was some bias in what pictures got shown. And I think this was hand selected out of maybe 1,000 pictures, and this some layers got removed. This might be the one that most looks like some Odinist runes, but I'm speculating, but that's kind of what got me thinking about that.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this, the idea that this was sort of ritualistic in nature, and whether or not the FBI behavioral analysis unit was involved in that. Certainly the defense has made a statement that they were, but of course, making that determination, it would not be made quickly, and it would be made with a lot of review and study and going to the crime scene, and not only that, as I mentioned earlier, consulting with experts in the field and interpreting whatever potential symbols, or interpreting any of these potential symbols. And if you can't interpret them, I don't know how you know that they're symbolic of a particular belief system or religion. I don't know how you interpret them, but they may be symbolic to the offender.
Right.
This could be symbolic, but and I am not versed in Odinism. I have worked crime scenes, and have the fact that we confess our sins and things like that. Like this person knows that based on what they left at the scene, like a note or something like that. And so they have knowledge of it. Does that mean they practice it? Does that mean not necessarily? So these are things you have to really be careful in your words. And the way it was written is that this, in the defense motion, was that the offender had Nordic beliefs. So it's not worded that this was a ritualistic killing or anything like that. It's just that they had these beliefs. Now, how do we know that they have them, or how do we know that they just have knowledge of them? That I think would be difficult to interpret, but perhaps they saw something that, we don't have access to that made them think. And then again, when it comes to profiling, that it could very well be that an investigator just called somebody in the BAU, and this happened all the time, sort of these informal conversations where, hey, I'm seeing this, and this, and the profiler will say, yeah, that sounds like it could be, but I would need more information. And an investigator, takes that as, okay, this is what the BAU thinks. And
yeah, just the first part of the sentence. Yeah, that sounds like Odinist.
well, I mean, we would get calls all the time. So people will just call in, and then, whoever's available takes a phone call from an investigator or a detective or a prosecutor. And like, for example, we have this, we have 2 murders here, and we're seeing this behavior at both these murders. Are these linked? And you say, yeah, they could be linked. And then somebody might run off and say, the FBI said they're linked. And we really haven't looked at, we're just saying, well, it sounds like it could be. I mean, there's nothing that you would say not at all. So I don't know if this is what happened here, or if the FBI did an official, or the FBI's BAU did an official profile. And if they did, that would be, that would be in writing. It would contain all of the information concerning the crime and the summary of the crime. It would contain autopsy results and the summary of what those were. It would contain a detailed write-up on victimology. And then it would give their assessment and the basis for their assessment, specifically, why they make those determinations. That is typical. Now, if it's just a phone call that somebody's called in, I mean, it's kind of routine and standard operating procedure and practice. If FBI agents take a phone call, they document it. They document it either in just a communication that goes to a file, but they just say, oh, so-and-so called me here. And we document everything and should, just for these very reasons. You can say, well, if there's a discrepancy in maybe, the information, you can say, well, I actually wrote a little report on this, and this is what I said. And, it seems like a pretty specific comment. So, but I just don't know what the process was for that comment to be provided.
Yeah, once they get into all the legal strategy, we're only getting one side of the story on one thing and then one side of the story on the other. So we know there's always something.
I mean, it's really interesting to me, and it's certainly caught my, I mean, I've, just, kind of typical, I follow cases, and even though I wasn't involved in Delphi, it's a case that I have also followed, not nearly as closely as you and your listeners. So I don't know all the details. In fact, you've had to fill me in on a few things, but I've followed the progression of it. And certainly the Franks motion, where it mentioned FBI, caught my attention because of my experience. And, of course, I had all these questions of, well, what more did they say? It's interesting to me from a behavioral perspective, and having done this work, how they would come to that conclusion. But then, then I kind of had to decompress and say, okay, they're not saying this was a ritualistic killing. They're saying that this person had Nordic beliefs. There's a difference. And, because one of the things that we really don't see, as we talked about earlier, is that we just don't really see it, killings motivated strictly by like a religious ritual or sacrifice. There's always some other motivation, primary motivation.
So just to be clear, about how many cases have you seen crime scenes of, and have you ever seen something like this before?
I couldn't tell you how many crime scenes I've seen.
10, 100, 200, 500, ballpark?
I never even thought about it.
Hey, that's a good question. All right.
I'm stumped. I really don't know. I mean, because as a forensic scientist, I obviously went to so many crime scenes, and then the FBI is an evidence response team, and then I just don't even know. Fig, hundreds maybe. But hundreds, people will be like, that's ridiculous. You couldn't have worked hundreds. So I don't really know what a number is.
Just seen. So that could be in studying. It doesn't even have to be something that you worked on.
Yeah, I guess studying, it would be millions. I mean, this is my passion. It's, this is my life's work and my passion. And I study things all the time that I haven't actually worked on. So yeah, a lot. Have I ever seen anything exactly like this? No, but I mean, I could probably say that for every case that I've ever had. I've never seen anything
Right.
exactly like this. And again, without knowing the details, it's hard to say for sure, have I seen something like this? Now, if it turns out to be that, these are symbolic branches placed, yeah, I've never seen that before. But if it turns out,
yeah,
that's
a question I was asking. You're answering it better than I asked it.
Yeah. No, it really depends on the motive and the evidence that's there. Is, if we're looking at this as, a double homicide where two girls were killed, possibly sexually motivated and covered up. Yes, I've seen that before. But if these are is there symbolism here, and if motivation is more than just a sexual motivation, and these are strategically placed branch, I have not seen that. I have seen staging, I have seen posing, I have seen symbols and symbolism within crime scenes, but those always tended to be sexually motivated. But something exactly like this, no.
And then we'll clear up real quick.
That's a long answer. I could have just said
that's
no.
great. Oh, that's great.
I mean, it really is dependent. It's really dependent on, the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Here's something you might have seen before, because you said Golden State Killer, and I remember that one a little bit, but I most remember seeing like video of him going into the courtroom and acting really like ill and sick, and then it showed up like working out in his prison cell. So when this came up, I'm like, oh, it reminds me of the Golden State Killer, where they're just trying to make him, the defense trying to make him look really ill and sick. And
so I'll speak to that, because when I saw him, I wasn't surprised. So one of the things that was very evident in people who had come into contact with who I believed was the offender, either they were victims or they were witnesses that saw him, the ones that I thought were real sightings of him, they noted odd behavior on his part. And he had this habit of mumbling and behaving weird. And in fact, one witness who I truly believe encountered him, pretty much face to face, thought he might have Down syndrome. The way he was acting, and he got real nervous. It was just, and I thought this was a true characteristic of his, that this was really something when he's not able to completely control his environment, he starts to implode. And that's what happened, I think, when he was arrested. And so I felt that the version of Joe D'Angelo that people saw in court, where he looked like this confused old man, was probably the truest version of him. He really had a really hard time when his control was completely taken away from him. And that was evident in his crimes. Whenever he didn't have control, he kind of imploded a bit. And that was noted by witnesses and victims. They may not have noticed or, understood that was happening with him. But it was a definite pattern. So in that case, I thought, I didn't think that this was somebody who was malingering, but I felt like that we were seeing a true version. And of course, when he's back in, his environment where he can control himself, he's perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's just was him, how he dealt with it. That's my opinion. Now here, I don't know, without having more information available. I mean, people that know him and know him personally and have seen him perhaps deal with stressful situations and how he reacts to that, they may know, is this real, or is this, how he always acts? So I think that would be, something people who know him could tell you, yeah, this is real or this is not real. So
that's interesting. Yeah. The power and control type is what it seemed like. And yeah, being outside of your element, what that does. Now you're not in control of your environment, like in a courtroom.
Yeah. And that's not like that with everybody. I mean, you've seen killers go into the courtroom and they command the room and they're
Try
perfectly
and take
comfortable.
control, right? Mhm.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, and that just goes to show you how, even though they're all serial killers, they're all very different. And one of my colleagues always said, if you've seen one serial killer, you've seen one serial killer.
Mhm.
So, there may be some characteristics they have in common, but they're all very different. And you have to look at each case or each series of cases attributed to that particular offender separate and apart from everybody else. You can't make these generalizations. And,
Right.
this may be, complete malingering and he's faking and he's fine. That could be, and it could be the, true decline because of what he's faced with. And, if he's somebody who is feeling bad for what he has done, it could be eating at him and just being caught in the circumstances he's in. It could be real. It's really hard to say.
Yeah,
For
there's
me.
confessions on the phone where he confessed to his wife and mother, and I think some medical staff about doing the confessions. And last night I was going to sleep, I was listening to Happy Face Killer. It was an interview for like 2 or 3 weeks ago on how he confessed to things and how he felt better about it, and how he just wrote to the Long Island serial killer about recommending to do that and just moving on, and that we could figure things out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, some people want to confess and, in some people do not want to discuss their crimes at all. It's a very personal decision on the part of the killers of what they're comfortable with. And some may have remorse. There's certain cases where I feel like people just really don't have any remorse, but, it could be dependent on if they have remorse, if they need to get things off their chest. But then some people they don't want to talk about the worst thing they've ever done and something that could be very personal to them, particularly if it's fantasy based. I mean, there's no one I know or a killer that I know that wants to disclose their deepest, darkest fantasies. So not to anybody.
I guess I'll start. So definitely thank you for spending time with me. It was so interesting. I know we could keep going, but I'm sure we have other things that we have to do, but yeah, hopefully we could talk again. And if there's, just so people can listen to your podcast, I looked it up real quick and I see that I could access it on iTunes, but is there any other platforms, or how often is it the show's released?
So we do a show every 2 weeks and it's on, all the platforms, wherever you get your podcasts. It's The Consult, Real FBI Profilers, and take a listen.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation today and getting to know you.
Yeah, me too.